Okay, so we are going to graph y equals 5 sine of 2x plus pi. Or, as it's also known, y equals 5 sine of 2 times x plus pi over 2. I just factored out the 2 from 2x plus pi. Why would you want to do that? It's you're probably going to be asked to find the phase shift of your function, and so it's pi over 2. For what we're doing, this rewriting is not necessary, but if you're asked about the phase shift or you're curious about the phase shift for some reason, writing it in this manner will tell you that the phase shift is pi over 2. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and graph. Here is the graph. It's just a sine graph. All the sine graphs kind of look like that. That's one cycle of it. One cycle of a sine wave. And all we have to do now is plot some points and slap some axes on there, and that'll be it. So the way to plot the points is to make a table of values. So our y values are 5 sine 2 times x plus pi over 2. Those are going to be the y values, and the x values are corresponding are what we're going to need to find. But in order to know what 5 times sine of 2x plus pi over 2 is, we need to know what sine of twice x plus pi over 2 is. And in order to know what that is, we need to know what twice x plus pi over 2 is. To know what that is, we need to know what x plus pi over 2 is. And finally, to know that, we need to know x. So, we've got our x values on the left, our y values on the right. Where do we start? We start with the column right before the column where sine first appears. And so that is the third column in this example. That's where we're going to start our table. And what we want is one full cycle of the sine graph. So your typical sine graph goes from 0 to 2 pi, and there are only a few values in there that that you probably know without a calculator. So we're going to use those. 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Those we know how to take the sine of. So that's why we start with these values. So then, moving to the right, let's take the sine of those. The sine of 0 is 0. Sine of pi over 2 is 1. Sine of pi is 0. Sine of 3 pi over 2 is 1. Sine of 2 pi is 0. And then continuing on to the right, the fifth column is achieved by just multiplying the entries in the fourth column by 5. So we get 0, 5, 0, negative 5, and 0. Okay, so our table's almost done now. We now have to work back to the left. So, given that we know twice x plus pi over 2, how can we use that information to find x plus pi over 2? The answer is just divide by 2. So, take the entries in the third column and divide them by 2. Entries in the third column, divide them by 2. 0 divided by 2 is 0. Pi over 2 divided by 2 is pi over 4. Pi divided by 2 is pi over 2. And it's written here as 2 pi over 4 so that we can have a common denominator for each entry in the second column. And that just shows the steady progression of these values in the second column. 3 pi over 2 divided by 2 is 3 pi over 4, and 2 pi divided by 2 is 4 pi over 4. Okay, so now we've got the second column, which is x plus pi over 2. How can we use that to find x? The answer is to subtract pi over 2. And so when we subtract pi over 2 from each of these values, we get negative 2 pi over 4, negative pi over 4, 0, pi over 4, and 2 pi over 4. There's our table. We've got the values of the sine graph at the first point, the second point, the third point, the fourth point, and the fifth point. So now all we have to do is plot those and put the x and y axis on there. And there we have it. One full cycle of this graph. The good thing is, if for some reason you wanted to extend this sketch, you can see it's easy to generate new values with this table. The x values, you can just keep going in the same pattern, add or subtract pi over 4, and the y values continue with this pattern, 0, 5, 0, negative 5. So you could extend in either direction pretty easily.